In the previous video, we learned how we can create an approval workflow. The scenarios that we discussed were very simple. Basically, we could create a request for approval and send it to one or more than one people, and they could review and submit their vote, whether approve or reject. Now, then we also went through using branches to have multiple requests to multiple people, as long as we know how many approval requests we are sending, so we could create one branch for every single approval request. And that approval request, again, could go to a bunch of people, and each one of them could process it separately. The key was that we didn't want any approver wait for the other approver to complete his or her job, and then they could see it. So the whole idea is that when we want to send this request, we should be able to send it to all of them at the same time. And they all approve it. After all the votes are complete, we wanted to collect the results and compile the final result of whatever we have. This video is slightly different. This is taking you through some complex scenario. In this request, employee is hired. So there is simply an onboarding process. During that onboarding process, someone can create a request for this employee, and there are multiple services available that can be given to this employee, like benefits, like health benefits, company cell phone, company car, I don't know, maybe desk phone or anything else. And I have a package of these services in one SharePoint list. Now, when the request is submitted, the requester can pick 1, 2, 3, or multiple services for this employee, and then each service has to go to a different manager to do the approve or reject. Finally, after all the votes are completed, it should create one compiled list of approved services for this employee. Sounds good? So let's get into it. To go through this scenario, I created two lists inside SharePoint. The main list that we are working with is going to be employee onboarding. So when a new employee joins, we create a list item here. The job title, first name, last name, and the service requests like company car, health plan, wireless headset, or anything else. And these items are picked from this lookup list inside SharePoint, inside the same site, from a list called employee services that has a complete list of available services with the approver name and approver email. Obviously, I could use the user field inside SharePoint, but because I want to send all the approval requests to the same email, I just decided to have a separate field with the different approver names, so it will show you that each request goes to a separate approver, although they all go to the same mailbox. So, obviously, start and wait for an approval cannot handle this job, because if you want to go through first request for the first item, nobody else will receive the request. We don't have a fixed number of requests, so basically we cannot really branch it. In this case, we need to split this start and wait for an approval and work with two different actions. One of them is going to be create an approval. The other one is going to be wait for an approval. So in one stage, we create the approval, we send the email, or we send the approval request to the potential approver. Then when all the requests are sent, we can wait for all the approvals, and when they all received, we can compile the final list. Now, let's see what each one of them does. Create an approval creates an approval with an approval ID, because now not everything is in the same action. We split this action, so this wait should know which approval request it's waiting for. That correlation happens using approval ID. So create an approval creates an approval ID. It sends the approval request to the approver, either through email or through the Power Automate app. Regardless, when the request is sent out, it also returns the approval ID to the flow. We can capture it, and when we want to wait for approval, we can actually use this approval ID so this poor guy knows what approval request it's waiting for. And then it continues with the next step. It sends the email, it doesn't wait. It jumps to the next step. So right after we send the first request, you can send the second request, third request, you can do 5 other things. And finally, after everything is settled down, you can wait for the approvals one at a time. Now on the other side, when we say wait for an approval, it needs a valid approval ID to work. It waits until the response from approver is received. So basically it cannot just move on. It waits till the job is complete. Only after response comes back, it continues to the next step. Again, we just split this start and wait for an approval into 2 controls. Everything else is the same. So before doing anything, let me show you how it works. There's a list for employee onboarding that I created. So when we create a new item, it accepts the title, first name, last name, and requested services. While the other list that I have is called employee services, and employee services is a complete list of available services to any new hire and the approver name. When I come back here, if I create a new SharePoint list item, I can add, for example, a CIO for this company. First name is going to be James. Last name is going to be Smith. And requested services, okay, let's give this guy company car. How about a desk phone? And what about a wireless headset? 3 services. You know what? We are not spending anything on it. Let me add 4. So let's keep the CIO happy. I click on Save, and the request is created. As simple as that. And every single one of them is actually referring to a list item inside the other list. We want to be able to process these requests directly from inside SharePoint. So when I click on Automate here, I should be able to pick up a workflow called, for example, Process Onboarding. Now let's do it. So I go to flow.microsoft.com to my Power Automate portal. I click on Create, and I click on Instant Cloud Flow. So I want to call it Process Onboarding. And I look up for SharePoint for a selected item. So basically I can select an item and I can fire a workflow related to that. Great. I click on Create. For a selected item, I pick up the SharePoint site, Power Automate Workshop, and the list name is going to be Employee Onboarding. I just need to add another compose just to make sure it's working. So I just pick it up here and I add the ID of that list item here. Let me just save it just to make sure it's available on SharePoint. Let me just refresh this page. And now from inside SharePoint under Automate, I should be able to see it. It's called Process Onboarding. So far, so good. So basically I can fire the flow from inside SharePoint. Great. I go back to my Power Automate. I just want to create a dummy approval request first before doing anything. So if I click on New Step, I want to search for approval. So I want to use Create an Approval instead of Start and Wait for Approval that we used before. So I click on Create an Approval. As you can see, approval type is exactly like before. So I select, for example, First to Respond. Title is going to be Test. I assign it to myself. Details, I say Test Details. And that's it. Now, when this guy works, it produces an approval ID. So I click on the New Step, and again, I search for approval, but this time I want to run Wait for an Approval. And as you can see, wait for an approval now requires a parameter, which is going to be the approval ID that I received from create an approval. So if I click on here, under create an approval here, under dynamic content, if I search for approval ID, now this wait for an approval knows that any approval request that is correlated to this approval ID is the one that it's waiting for. And that's it, just like before. I can add a new step, and I can put another compose here, so I can track the outcome of this approval request. Of course, I will get this response from wait for an approval. So inputs for this compose is going to be wait for an approval, wait for an approval. So let's go for outcome. Save. We can test it right here, at least just to warm up and understand how this request works. So let me just save it again. I go back to SharePoint, and from inside SharePoint, I want to run it for this CIO. So let me go to Automate, and I click on Process Onboarding. It prompts me for the connectors. We're good. Run flow, and happily ever after. Now it should send me the approval request. So let me go back to my mailbox. Okay, open a new tab. All right, so I got this guy. Now if I click on it, it shows me the request that I submitted with test details. I may approve it, and I click on submit. I'm happy with this. Let's see how the workflow worked. So let me go back here. God's sake, I saved it twice. Okay, so I have this guy here. So let me just click on this and check the outcome. First of all, compose contains the ID of the SharePoint list item. Doesn't matter at this moment, but as you can see, if I click on compose, remember I approved it. So the outcome of that approval request is approved. Fantastic. So far we know how we use it, but everything that we did so far could be done by create and wait for an approval single control. Now let's go to our own scenario and see what it can actually do for us, or go through the scenario that these two controls really add value. You remember our scenario, right? So we have employee onboarding, workflow should process item from employee onboarding, approvers should come from employee services, because I have approver names here, and then we continue with the same approval request. Let's see the strategy that we want to go through and solve this problem. First, when the item comes, I need to get all the approvers for each item. So we find each requested item in the employee services list. After that, we send approval requests for all the approvers. While we are doing this, we have to create an array of all the approval requests with the approval ID. Because remember, when we send the request out in a loop, we really don't know where the values are or what approval IDs have been created. So basically, when we are running it in a loop, we need to put everything in a Power Automate array. If you have already taken my Power Automate expression course on Udemy, I will put the link in the description. You exactly know what I'm talking about and how we can create an array. Otherwise, just watch this video to the end. If everything is clear for you, fantastic. If not, the details about how to work with these arrays and how to work with these expressions here are completely covered end-to-end in my Udemy course called Master Power Automate Expressions in 2 hours. Regardless, let's get back to it. When here we are processing all the requests, everything should look like this in an array. So I need to create an array that has approval ID, it has the service title, and it has the approver name. Remember, all the requests are out. After that, after everything is out, now we need to start reading the arrays, so approval IDs, one by one, and go for wait for approval. And this is the time that we actually get our answers for each item, and then we can compile the list of items into a variable and stick it into an email and send it out. Let's go ahead and do it. So I'm inside Power Automate again. I click on Edit. This compose, I don't need it anymore. I click on delete. Okay. This one, I don't need it either. But I need to get a little bit of information from the selected item. For a selected item, does not return much. It basically gives me the ID and URL of the item that has been selected. So I need to actually, first of all, use SharePoint. And I want to use get item. Get item. Remember, get item, not get items. Site address. I pick up Power Automate Workshop. List name is going to be employee onboarding. And ID is coming from for a selected item. ID is selected. Let me just rename this to get onboarding request. Great. After I get the onboarding request, I need to start with getting all the approvers for each item. This one requires an apply to each from where. All right. So the field that we have here, God's sake, where am I? Okay. The field that I am here, requested services, is actually an array. Let me show you. Let me come back here and let me just use a compose action, compose. And if I click on this compose, I click on here. Let me search for it. Requested services is the field name. So if I put it here, I don't need these two lines either. Let me just get rid of them. Delete and delete. Now, let me save it and run this flow one more time from SharePoint. So let me run it for this new CIO, automate, process onboarding. Run flow. Done. So I should be able to go there and capture it. Okay. So this is the second run. And if I click on it, remember we wanted to capture the requested services. You see what we get from here starts with a square bracket, which basically means it's an array. So basically we can capture every single item of this using an apply to each. Great. So let me click on edit again. I don't need this compose. Delete. New step. I use apply to each. Apply to each is selected, and for this apply to each, I look for requested services. I want to rename it send all approval requests. Great. Now, when I click on add action, now I want to send the requests out, and right after I send the request out, I want to add an item to the array of all the approval requests. So again, I search for approval, create an approval, and I want to rename it to send approval request. Okay. Approval type is going to be first to respond. We actually have one approver only. Title is going to be request for onboarding. And I may include first name and last name from here. First name space last name. We are getting it from get onboarding request. So this is the title. Assigned to, who it is assigned to, I need to get this item from the other table. Remember our diagram? Get all the approvers for each item from the other one. Okay, I was supposed to do it before I send the request. Fantastic. I did it a little bit by intention just to show you how to add something before that. Because before that, it doesn't let you do that. Don't worry about it. To add something before the send approval request, click on add an action and use get item to get the item from the employee services. So basically, I want to use get item to get the item from here, and from there I can get the approver name. Fantastic. I come back here. So I search for get item. Again, get item, not get items, because we have the ID. So I rename it to get service, which is good enough. Now to handle that, now to have it before that, you cannot drag and drop it before, but you can get this one and drag and drop it after that. So now we have the get service that actually gets a service from the SharePoint list that we want. It is in my Power Automate workshop, and the list name is going to be Employee Services this time. Remember, Employee Services has the list of titles, approver name, and approver email. Great. Now the ID is the request ID. So let's see here. Get onboarding request. When we get it, there is a requested services ID, which is the ID on the requested services. If you are using it here, it assumes that this request service ID is related to the current item of the apply to each. So we get all the items that we need from here. So when I go to the send approval request, assign to can come from get service. So get service has title, and I need email, approver email. So it's assigned to the approver email, and details, let me put dear, remember approver name, comma, enter, employee, I use first name, space, last name, is hired. Please review and approve request for his or her. What was the item that was requested? I need to get it from get service. So here, I remove this last, and under get service, I'm looking for title. Great. Kind regards, and workflow service. Great. So basically now we are sending the request out. If I go back to my PowerPoint, I send approval requests for all the approvers. This loop at the moment does that thing, but I need to create an array of all approval requests with approval IDs. Great. So this guy creates approval ID, as we know. Let's create a variable of type array that can have this information here. To do that, I go before the loop. Somewhere before, I add an action and I search for initialize variable. The variable name is going to be approval requests. Let me just rename the control properly. Initialize approval requests. Type is going to be array. Value, I don't put anything here. But when I come here, after the approval request is sent, I can add another action and I can append the row to the array that I have. So I use append, and I scroll down, append to array variable. And I need to pick up my array. The value that I want to add is going to be a JSON object. So the first parameter is going to be approval ID, double quote, approval ID. I just remove the spaces. And approval ID is going to be an approval ID from the send approval request, right? So I can see the send approval request, and I can add the approval ID right between the double quotes, comma. The next parameter is going to be the service title. So I create another property called service title, just like before, colon, double quote, and inside it, I put title. Title from the get service. What else? And the last one is going to be the approver name. Again, I can put approver name. And this approver name is going to be approver name. I get it from get service, correct? Get service was getting the service from the second table. Approver name, I got it. I forgot the double quotes here. Don't forget to enclose it in double quote. So approval ID, service title, approver name. Let me get a copy of it and put it in Notepad. I paste it here. What happens as the value doesn't really matter, I just want the titles. Okay. Okay, fine. I just need these property names exactly the way they are when I want to capture them. Fantastic. I go back here, save. The only thing is that I need to rename this, and I can say append to approval requests. Let's save it, and we're good. So far, this guy reads every single item, sends the requests out, and adds them to an array. We are done with this, and we created our array so far. Now it's time to wait and get the approval requests. To do that, now we need to read the items from this array. So let me come back here. Let me collapse this one. I need another apply to each. That this time, this apply to each, let me just rename it. I call it wait for all approval requests. What is going to be the item that I want to apply to each? You got it. This is the array. Because now I need to pass the approval IDs one by one and get the responses back. So I come back here, variables, approval requests. That's the array that I have. So inside this, I need to get every single item, so basically the apply to each current item, and get these properties: approval ID, service title, and approver name. Of course, I also need to capture the outcome. To do that, I click on here. First trick that I use, I put a compose here. This is one of the things that you have to be creative to use it, and I call it current request. Basically, it's a current item. I come inside it, I add the current item here. Don't rush and click on the first one. There are two current items. One is send all approval requests that goes back to the previous loop. You don't want to use that. The second one is wait for all approval requests. This is the current item of this loop. So let me just select this one. And you may ask, Ali, why do you put it in compose? We can use it directly. No, you cannot. And I'm telling you why. Well, you can technically, but it's a lot more hassle. This one makes your life a whole lot easier. Let me get there in a second. So current request is the current item that I am processing. And actually on every iteration, this compose will have an instance of this object. When I have that, now I can start processing it in a wait for approval. So let me just search for approval again. This time I need to wait for approval. And I can say rename it and call it wait for approval response. The approval ID that I want is going to be the current item of this array. The current item, I need to get it from here. Yes, you can see the current item here, but we need to use expression because we don't need the whole item. inside it, I need the approval ID of the current item. Correct? See how I do it. I go back to the approval ID. I click on the expression tab. I need to pick up the current item under the expression tab. To do that, I come back here. I press space. I go back to dynamic content and I search for the current item or the current request output. See, I can select the current request output, but if I scroll down, for some weird reason, Power Automate does not show me the current item. That's why I put it in a compose and then I call it from compose. After I'm here, I just say dot Control V and I put my approval ID from this notepad here. Good. Right after I'm done, don't forget to remove this extra space that I added in the beginning just to trick the Power Automate designer, and we're good to go. So now this loop at this stage is waiting for one single approval request. It doesn't mean that it is the first one that is being processed, but until everything is processed, we don't have any rush to finish this approval request because everybody has received their requests and we are waiting for their approval. So after this wait for approval response works and comes back, we need to get the response and add it to an email. To add it to an email, I also want to add another variable right in the beginning. Again, I look for initialize variable. I call it initialize email text. Email text. And the type is going to be a string. I leave it just blank. Now if I go for wait for all approval requests, after wait for approval came back, I can click on add an action and I can add append. And this time, instead of appending to an array, I'm appending to a string. And this string is going to be my email text. The value that I want to add is going to be the title of the item that has been approved. Or you know what? Let me put all the approved and non-approved in one email and compile everybody's final answer. That's going to be more comprehensive. So I would say request for, I have the title, right? So I can click on expression again. Again, the same technique, space, I click back on dynamic content. I select the current item here, current request, output, dot. I need the service title, right? So I add it here. Again, don't forget to remove that space in the beginning. So request for the title, whatever the title was, is approve or reject. Let me put it in double quote. You can put it in anything. Again, I need to get the output from wait for approval response. So wait for approval response. I need to get the outcome by who was the approver. Remember, we have it in our array. It's called approver name, right? So I want to come back here. Request for whatever is approve or reject by, and I can go to the expression and use the same trick. Here, space, I go back to the dynamic content, and again, I'm looking for current request, output, and again, dot approver name. I go to the beginning and remove the space. Click on OK. And because I want to send it as an HTML, I use BR / as the new line character. Good. Let me just save it. So now every response that comes, it generates one line in the email that I want to send out. I know this video is getting too long. Don't worry, we are almost in the end. So after all the items are processed here, we are done with navigating through all the requests in the array and pass them to wait for approval. And for every single one of them, we added request outcome to a string variable as email text. Fantastic. All we need to do is just send email out. New step. So I come back here and I say send email. Send an email v2. And I send it to myself. Right? Subject onboarding services for, and I search for first name and space last name. Good. And for the email body, I just add the email text. Well, I usually should put hello, how are you, and all those greetings and stuff in the email, but at the moment I don't have time and I don't have patience for it. And I just rename it and I say send final list to HR. Okay. Click on save. Moment of truth. Let's go and test it. So I go back to my SharePoint site and I want to process it for SharePoint developer. Let me just click on automate and I say process onboarding. Remember, there are 3 items: work from home, company cell phone, and desk phone. Let me just click on continue, run flow. Well, now I should get 3 emails that has 3 approval requests for work from home, company cell phone, and desk phone for someone called first name, last name, Alireza, Aliabadi. So let me go back to my mailbox and see what I got. First one, there's a request for Kathy. This request is for work from home. Let's see if we sent it to the right person. Here, work from home is gone to Kathy. Of course, it's coming to my mailbox. I'm good with that. Gosh, here. I just approve it. This guy is a nice guy. Let him work from home. Second one. The request goes to Sarah for company cell phone. Let's see if you're sending it to the right person. Was it this one? Yeah. Company cell phone, it goes to Sarah. Perfect. We're good. So I can go back to the mailbox. Let's approve this one too. And finally, there is a request for desk phone. For God's sake, this guy is a mobile guy. No, let's just reject it, but it goes to Kazanfer. And let me just double check if we got it for the right person. Yes, Kazanfer receives the request for desk phone. Fantastic. And this guy says submit and rejects it. Fine. Moment of truth. Onboarding services for Alireza Aliabadi. Request for work from home is approved by Kathy. Request for company cell phone is approved by Sarah. Request for desk phone is rejected by Kazanfer. And if you like this video, you know what to do. All right, that was all about it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and we almost covered everything that we needed to learn about working with Power Automate. I cannot really imagine any other more complicated scenario for the Power Automate approval than what we discussed and what we went through today. Just one quick note. I will be disappearing probably for a month or so to finish the course that I have in hand for Udemy. Meanwhile, if you need anything, if you want to reach me for something like a quick question or something like that, either put your comments right there or my contact on LinkedIn. My contact on LinkedIn is also in the video description. You can always reach me through LinkedIn, and if there is anything that I can help, by all means. I'm quite busy, so don't expect quick answer on LinkedIn, but I do my best to catch up as much as I can. Next video, I'm going to tell you the new course launch on Udemy. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned, and I'll see you soon in the next video.